So moving on, introduction to microbes. You know, we all sort of know they're very tiny and they're usually single cell, or they are single cell. And whether they come from, well, they've been around since about the beginning of the planet's existence that we know of. So 4.5 billion years, give or take a few. And basically, if we sort of compress the history of the world into 24 hours, as it says, the microbes would have been, you know, early starters, 4 a.m., you know, do the milking. Then the dinosaurs wouldn't have been here till 11 o'clock at night, and the humans at 2 minutes before midnight. So we haven't been around for very long. And but this is all evolved within the microbial systems, ecosystems. What do they do? Basically, you know, we say in the slide here, they create the conditions for life, which is basically another way of saying we believe that's where life came from. And they're ubiquitous, they're everywhere. There's nowhere they're not, and there's gazillions of them, and they do all kinds of things all day long. And you can't see them visibly, but we can certainly see when they've been adversely affected by the kind of, you know, pollution, waste, all that kind of stuff, unhealthy environments. Like Bill Bryson said, without microbes, we would be dead in a day if we lasted that long. Without humans, microbes would get along just fine. So we put all that in that timeline just to represent that 24-hour period. That's a line. And formation of Earth at 4.56 billion years ago. And, you know, microbes getting quite active fairly early on. And then in the early stages, that the Earth's atmosphere was actually carbon dioxide atmosphere. And we all lived, life existed on carbon dioxide. And then about 2 billion years ago, it switched to oxygen, which greatly accelerated our development. So we really grew much quicker, and to the fact we've landed up with massive great dinosaurs and things like that. So here we are right at the end of that line. Basically, what happened when we believe was when the Earth sort of formed, the first thing that came was a mantle of, or a mat of microbial structure that surrounded the Earth. And there was this soup. And from that soup, all life originated from, or came from there. And then, you know, things evolved and changed and, you know, multiplied and all those sort of things. But that soup, we believe, was consistent around the world, and we'll come to that in a minute. But our mother culture, that which we sort of brew all our products from, we extract that basically from virgin soil, and it contains, you know, billions of microbes in a liter. We've got here a visual of the Yellowstone National Park, where this is probably the best representation of kind of what the microbial mat probably looked like at the early stages out of that sort of very fertile, you know, ever-changing kind of growing medium. And then what do microbes do? What microbes are very good at is closing the circle of life. And as we say quite often, it doesn't matter where in the circle you introduce the microbes, they will be effective because they can go all the way around. We as human beings are not very good at closing the circle. That's why we have all the imbalances, why we have the pollution and, you know, oceans of plastic and all that kind of stuff, because we have no, you know, history of being able to close the circles. Microbes naturally close circles. And that's why they're so helpful in all areas the environment, and they basically just work. They have an intelligence and they work for well-being. So what do microbes do? Basically, microbes do three things that we'll talk about. And the first one is they balance. It's called talks about the dominance of microbes. But about 0.5% of microbes are pathogenic. They're kind of nasty and not helpful for us as living. They do have certain functions, but if you get too many of them, like the degenerative ones, well, we know things, people, crops get sick. So the regenerative ones are about the same number, about 5%, 5% of the total number of microbes, because in truth, it's just billions and billions of them. So what's important is all the ones in the middle, the 98% or 99% in the middle are all opportunistic. They go to whichever one is the strongest. So our whole thing about getting them to work for us is to always make sure the regenerative microbes are in, the majority. Then all the rest of the microbes work for us. They join our gang and they sort of work for us. So quite often in certain applications, you don't need to use a lot of microbes. You just need to shift the balance. So the next thing they do is they act as a powerful antioxidant. And we know that many of our issues today, recently we were in Germany and they were having trouble with the grazing for the dairy cattle, because now that grazing was starting to degenerate and not have all the goodness they were supposed to have. And that was because of being close to a motorway, so high levels of oxidation. So microbes reverse that. They neutralize the free radicals, which kind of cause the oxidation. They support immunity, whether it's in people, in crops, in plants, whatever it is, that just makes things stronger. And of course, microbes basically aid every living process. This is a picture of an apple of which one side has been painted with microbes and one side hasn't. So obviously the side that hasn't been painted has started to oxidize, which is, and the other side is fine. So that just shows you a visual effect of what the microbes do in the field of oxidation.
Sorry, I just turned it down.
So the other thing microbes do is they create fermentation. Microbes change just any, like a putrefaction or composting, rotting process into a fermentation process. So what's the advantage of that? Putrefaction is basically is a sort of negative process. It's negative because in putrefaction, things smell bad. The reason they smell bad is because they are bad. So if something putrefies, it creates a lot of toxins. It's not good for soil health or the environment. That's all the methanes, ammonias that we're all having such trouble with now. So then there's rotting and composting. It's not as bad as putrefying, but it's still oxidative. It still creates free radicals in the atmosphere. You lose some of the energy of the material that's rotting or composting, and then again, it can sometimes smell. And you don't get particularly good products out of it. They're not as toxic, but they're not as helpful. So by adding microbes to any composting heap or things like that, you change it to fermentation. So the first thing you'd notice if you did that is the smell would go. If you have a slurry pit, by adding microbes within half an hour, if you've done the balance right, then the first thing that's gone is the smell. There's no more smell. And then, of course, they promote soil life. You're putting microbes back in there. You're not losing the energy of the product, and you're coming off with positive, helpful ingredients in the fermentation. So we always say that the magic is in the fermentation. If you can start something fermenting, it's usually pretty helpful. So where do we source our microbes? Where we go and find our microbes, our mother culture, is we go back to close to the mantle as we can. So we go and find a virgin piece of soil somewhere around us that nobody's lived on or planted on or put chemicals on, things like that. And we harvest the microbes from that area. And we've done that in, as it says, in Europe, in China, in Africa, and Australia. And the thing is, once you take the microbes out of the ground in those areas and you follow a certain protocol, you land up with exactly the same, not exactly, but very close combination of the species are the same and the number are the same. So whether it's in China or whether it's down the road from here, they will be the same. And that's kind of a bit of a wow for us. We know that because we've actually done it. So then for us, once we've collected the microbes using, organic starch and mixing it with a few good things, and we get them out of the ground, we then put them through 3 stages of fermentation after that, where we kind of just boost their numbers, is basically what we're doing. And we do that about 4 times till we come up with what we consider a really strong, balanced combination of effective microorganisms. So that's me. I'll hand you over to Richard. He understands all this stuff.
I think everybody knows me, but I'm Richard Baker. I started here in February working with Jeff, originally just to help out with the brewing. And I always say to people, it's funny that I spent 17 years up until this point trying to kill bacteria as a brewer of beer, and now I'm nurturing them and wanting them to have a happy life. So can we just, this is, Jeff's talked about the way that we brew up the mixture, and this is a video from the microscope, so you can see all the little microbes moving around, and they're all different shapes. There's lots of energy, lots of things going on. Just keep clicking, right clicking. So you can see how vibrant that population is, and that's the thing that we're doing, is we're putting a dynamic, vibrant population of microbes into people with the probiotics, but also into the soil when we do this. So I'm going to talk more about the how we're doing things in agriculture, and take you through some trials that we've done and various other things, and hopefully stimulate some questions. So as the slide shows, can we next slide? In soil we've got microbes, bacteria. We've also got other things like protozoa, amoeba, flagellates, nematodes. This is actually a ciliate you can see moving around in the top right hand corner. Now there's not so many microbes showing in this slide. There are a few moving around, probably because the ciliate actually eats them. And in soil, it's really important that we have a balance of all of these things. There are nematodes that eat bacteria. There are nematodes that eat nematodes. There are all sorts of different flagellates and ciliates. And as well as the bacteria in the soil, having that balance keeps everything in check, so that no one population starts to dominate the others, and then you end up with an unhealthy situation. So it's really important to have that balance. So microbes are really involved in so many aspects of agricultural science. In the carbon cycle, obviously one of the most important things. There's an amazing thing I've only just found out about in the last sort of 8 months, is that plants will actually exude sugars to attract microbes, and they work very closely to the roots in a thing called the rhizosphere, and they work in conjunction with mycorrhizal fungi. And what they will actually do is they will tune the exudates that they put out to get the nutrients that they need. So if they're under stress for any particular reason, if they haven't got enough magnesium, they will send out a sugar that attracts a microbe that will go and get some magnesium for them. And it's quite an amazing cycle when you look at it. And then they work with the mycorrhizal fungi. Mycorrhizal fungi can actually live inside the roots of the plant. They extend what are called hyphae out to extend the root system way beyond the normal plant system. And that will then go and gather water. It will go and gather those nutrients that the plant needs and bring them back from a much wider area. A bit more on this later on about how the mycorrhizal fungi help biodiversity as well. But it's a really amazing role that microbes play in the system. They're also very heavily involved in the other big cycle, or one of the other big cycles, the nitrogen cycle. And virtually every stage of the process requires microbes doing something. So they fix nitrogen in the first place, both in rhizobium bacteria in legumes, but they're also free living microbes that also fix nitrogen as well. They then turn it from ammonia and ammonium coming from waste from animals and plants, and they turn that into nitrites and then nitrates, and that's when it gets assimilated into the plant. So nitrogen is one of the essential elements in chlorophyll. Without it, then plants wouldn't survive, they wouldn't grow, and the whole thing would end up in a, well, we wouldn't be here. And then the final bit of the process, the denitrifying bacteria, for a long time I thought, what on earth are they there for? I mean, they're putting everything back in the system. The trouble is nitrogen is very soluble, it ends up back in the water courses, and we'd end up taking the nitrogen out of the atmosphere, and it will end up in the sea. And again, we wouldn't be here anymore. So the whole cycle is controlled by bacteria, and it's the most crucial part of life. And they've got the whole system sewn up very cleverly. So shows just how important they are, both in the carbon and the nitrogen cycle. Ooh, can I go back one? Yeah. So this is the analysis that Jeff mentioned earlier, where we've got two separate analyses done in Barcelona University. And you can see the main 15 or the top 15 species that are there, but there are somewhere between 5,000 and 40,000 other species in the mix. But these are the main ones. And you can see how close the counts are on each of those. They're within 2 or 3% across most of them. So they are very, very similar in the species. And particular species there that are of interest in agriculture. First of all, Bacillus subtilis, which is a really important one. It's a PGPR, plant growth promoting rhizobacteria, and it does that by fixing nitrogen. It's free living, so it's not tied into the roots, but it floats around and will fix nitrogen in the soil, which then boosts the plant growth. It will also solubilize phosphorus and other nutrients, so it's one of the most important bacteria in agricultural soils. We've also got a lot of bifidobacteriums in there. They're very important in human and animal health, and they also control pathogens by lowering the pH, as do lactobacillus. They are the sort of the heavy horses of microbes. They break down organic matter in soil, and they lower pH, and they lock in ammonia in particular, so that ammonia isn't lost into the air but is kept in the soil. We also have yeast species in there, Saccharomyces boulardii and Cerevisiae, which is actually the beer brewing yeast, so I know it well. And they produce plant hormones and again solubilize nutrients, particularly phosphorus. And then the final one is Streptococcus thermophilus, which is found in most milks, cheeses and yogurt. So it's a really important part of the mixture.
And both these samples were collected on our land here on areas that are wooded and have not been used that we know of. So we didn't have to go 1,000 miles to find them.
Yep. So what do microbes actually do in the soil? The first thing, I mean, we've got trials to support all of these elements, which we'll come on to. I mean, the first thing is soil structure, which is so important for water retention and for oxygen getting into the soil, and just the root structures and everything like that. The second one is nutrients, as I've started to describe with the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle. Carbon sequestration is an important part of the role that microbes play. And the fourth thing is building in resilience. So we've got examples of how they do that in each case. The first one, changing soil structure. Microbes attract earthworms. Earthworms like to eat microbes, and they're a very handy food source. And they also have a symbiotic relationship with them. People who've dissected earthworms find there are microbes living inside them, and they help to digest food. Earthworms are like chickens. They don't have teeth, but they have a crop, and they have all the mechanisms to break up soil internally. The microbes help them do that, to turn organic matter into humus, which the plant can then access. And what they do is they break up the soil structure and turn it into something useful. So there are three different types of worm. There are epigeic worms that live in the surface, and they turn nutrient-rich material and take it down into the ground. So they start the process. And then there are endogeic earthworms. These are doing sort of the main work of moving stuff around and taking that top material and turning it into something more akin to humus. And then finally, there are anesic worms, which are the big long ones where you see a worm cast on a lawn in the morning. That's an anesic worm that can burrow down several feet. And they're very important for getting moisture and oxygen down deep into the soil. And roots will actually use those holes to get down into the nutrients way below the surface. So they're all working away, and microbes help them do that. This is an example. We did some pasture trials in the New Forest earlier in the year, in the early spring. And this was the soil we found. This was permanent pasture, and basically it was very claggy. We found 300 psi plus compaction, about 3 inches down from the surface. Very, very little chance for the roots to get through, dense. And we found 5 very slow juvenile earthworms in a standard spadeful. And we went back 3 months later, having done some work. We did some subsoiling, where we just subsoiled the ground, didn't do anything else. And then we also subsoiled and injected a solution of microbes just below the compaction layer. And then we looked at those separately. So the first one, this was just subsoiled. So we got rid of the compaction layer, but there was a lighter structure, but it was still relatively dense. You can see some cracks opening up there. The roots were going down a little bit further. We still only had 5 rather slow juvenile earthworms, not much going on the earthworm front. And then this was the sample of the same day, 3 months later, after we'd done the subsoiling. And this was subsoil with microbes. There was no compaction. We had a completely different soil structure, very open, crumb, and the earthworm count was amazing. At 15 active earthworms, including 2 adults. And that was just in 3 months from doing those trials. So that's when I really woke up to the fact that this was something exciting. You know, I'd heard Jeff talking about it, but I realized when I got my hands on the soil that there was a massive difference in the way things had gone. And looking at that in more detail, there's a few things that come out. The soil structure is different, and that's partly because of mycorrhizal fungi producing this substance called glomalin, the amazing thing, and that basically glues all of the elements in the soil together and creates an aggregate, which then has pores in between where water can draw down, and you get a vacuum which then draws air down underneath the surface as well. So all of that gives you more water infiltration, a lot more organic matter in the soil because of the worm activity, less runoff, less pollution, and better plant growth. So that soil structure is really crucial. The worms themselves produce polysaccharides, which is like a long chain sugar, which microbes love to eat. So that attracts more of them, which keeps the worms happy in other ways. So the whole system works in balance, back to the balance of all the microbes that Jeff talked about right at the beginning. And it's crucial in biodiversity below and above ground. Just a bit on the compaction layer. I know Sam and I talked about this at Macaroni Farm, that plants just can't get through that dense layer, and it comes from a loss of soil structure. And Jeff, I'm sure, will kick in with stories of Africa, where they've never used a tractor on the land, but they still get compaction. Yeah. So and it just prevents roots getting through to the nutrients down below, and they end up not growing as well. So the soil structure is really important from that point of view. So this is some evidence of how plants will grow better with microbes around. This is a white clover trial that we did early in the summer. Sorry, white mustard, I should say. This is just after 1 week with a microbial compost. And we achieved 40% more plant growth with microbes than without, 30% more root length. We had, as you can see, is two completely separate plants. One's got 4 leaves, the other's only just got 2. And the other thing to notice is the colour, the vivid green from the chlorophyll, which was really evident in the microbe watered plants. We also did some pot trials with potatoes, and you can see here the difference in the same period. This is 2 months after the first shoots. We've got a much higher density of potato leaves, and we ended up with a 9% increase in yield from those samples as well. And all that was watering in with microbes and nothing else. We just watered in water on the left and microbes and water on the right. A little bit on the nutrient take-up. Mycorrhizal fungi extend the root system. They're also made of carbon, which I'll come on to in a minute. So they absorb a lot of carbon in the soil. And one of the great things about the whole regenerative agricultural movement is that we are reducing the amount of cultivation that goes on in the soil. That allows these hyphae to stay around. If you plough, then every year you break up that structure and it has to start again from scratch. But having those long tendrils that you can see in the image, transferring food and nutrients and water around the system helps with biodiversity, and it gets plants to help each other, which again I'll come on to in a minute. The third area is carbon sequestration. Carbon capture is obviously very sexy at the moment, and there's various ways that microbes help in that. Mineralized carbon, most of the microbes in the soil are actually dead. They've died over the years, and they mineralize carbon because they're made of, a large proportion of them is made of carbon, and they go into the soil, and then that's captured in there for use later on. The mycorrhizal fungi we talked about, they extend the root system, but they're made of carbon in a big way, and so they're locking more carbon in. Cover crop will build organic matter and provides benefits. One of the key things is having a cover crop means that you're always feeding the microbe population with sugar exudate. So bare soil means the microbes don't get any energy from the sun, they're not getting any carbon coming down through the roots, and so they end up either dying or going elsewhere where they can get food. So a cover crop is important for building carbon in the soil, but it's also very good for keeping the microbes happy and keeping them fed. And then, as we've discussed, photosynthesis draws down carbon dioxide. Plants grow, capture carbon in the plant, and then when they die down, then we end up with carbon being taken down by the worms. So resilience is the final area, and this is crucial. And I've only really, in the last few months, realised just how important soil biodiversity is compared to, I mean, everyone talks about what's above ground, but down below it's important as well. The picture on the left of the screen is of the JENA experiment, which was, it's been carried out for decades in Eastern Europe, East Germany, or former East Germany. And they took, I think, 118 plots shown in that picture and planted different combinations of plants in them. And one of the things they found was that the plants where there's more biodiversity, so the more species of plants in a plot, the better those plots tend to do under stress. And they had various drought periods and found that monocultures and places with only a few different species struggled to keep going in the drought, whereas areas where you had high biodiversity and lots of different species, they did extremely well even in drought conditions. the same thing happens down below as well. And if you look at the picture down below, it shows different root structures for different crops. You have things like sainfoin that has very, very long tap roots, and chicory. So they do a very good job of breaking up the soil and getting down into the very depths of the soil. And then you have other plants like some clovers have very sort of fibrous root systems. And so they're very good at holding the surface together and stopping erosion. And if you combine that with mycorrhizal fungi doing their thing in between those, and a wide variety of bacteria as well, because all of those plants will attract different bacteria to them. Different microbes will prefer different root systems, and different plants will be able to do different jobs. And what they will do is they will basically work together. So that's why these multi-species plots do best, because plants that really enjoy drought will support plants that are really struggling, and they will help them to get access to nutrients and water through the system of fungi. And in the same way, on the top of the plants, you've got the leaves, and there's a thing called photosynthesis capacity, which is based on the amount of leaf that you've got. It's also the color of the leaves, because that will filter out different colors of light. The height of the plant will mean that at certain times of day, certain plants get more light than others. And so all of that gives you, when you've got biodiversity, you've got lots of different shaped leaves, lots of different colors, lots of different heights, and they'll all work together to maximize the height. Just going back to the JENA experiment, one of the things that after about 10 years, they had a massive flood, meters of water on the surface, and they were really upset because they thought they would lose the whole experiment. But as the water drained away, after a couple of weeks, they realized that it was still those same plots with lots of diversity that were able to survive the floods as well. And they came back much more quickly than the other plots. So it really does make a huge difference in all sorts of ways when plants are stressed. So the practicalities and what we're trying to achieve here, we don't want to talk too much about regenerative agriculture because some people get turned off by it, but I think this applies to all reduced tillage, and in the future I think we're going to have to see massive changes in agriculture because of the cost of chemical fertilizers and pesticides, and we're seeing even die-hard plough merchants still looking to reduce their diesel costs by doing a bit less. So whatever part of the cycle you're on in going towards regenerative, I think there's still something to be gained from this sort of work. And so what we're looking to do is to reduce the time it takes to recover the yields when you start to go towards a low till, no till system. And I've been listening to podcasts and farming today, and all sorts of reading all sorts of stories about farmers saying, my father started this regenerative process 25 years ago, and here we are, we've put 2% more organic matter into the soil, and it takes a long time if you just let it happen. But the trials that we did in the New Forest show the improvement in structure in months. And by putting a vibrant population of microbes in, rather than waiting for them to wake up and slowly increase as you increase the organic matter, we're putting microbes in that are raring to go, they're full of life, as you saw in that early video. And they've got food with them in the form of molasses that allows them to get going quickly while they adjust to their environment. And so what we're hoping to do is close that yield gap and bring the time frame from tens of years into 3 or 4 years, where you're back at the same yield as you were before switching to a less invasive system. There are various ways of doing this, and we've got 2 partners, one in Germany and Austria and one in Spain, and they have slightly different, well, very different approaches to getting microbes into the ground. The Germans are really into cover crop mulching, and so they have like a rotivator mechanism, or a what do they call them? Cover crop crimper, cover crop crimper. Yeah. And what that does is basically there's a spray bar which you can see in the bottom right hand corner, which is just behind the blade area, and as you run across the cover crop and break it without actually pulling the roots out, you spray microbes on top of it and you seal them into a lovely composting mix. And so you've still got the root structure in the system that's still feeding carbon down into the soil. And then on top of that, you've got this microbial mix of cover crops and soil, which will then attract the earthworms, and they'll come and pick all that stuff up and take it down deep into the soil. The Spanish love composting, and they're very keen on getting compost onto vineyard soils, for example. They've had huge success on vineyards getting compost, and it has the benefit of you've already got organic matter ready to go. It's humus, and you've then got microbes, again attracting earthworms, and it's very quickly incorporated into the soil with all those nutrients ready to feed the plants. So how we work, we're looking to put microbes in whatever form is appropriate. If there's compaction layers in the soil, then subsoiling is obviously a good way forward. If you haven't got compaction, then there are various options to get microbes on, spraying on, or using cover crops. And we're looking really to develop long-term relationships with farmers. Once you put the microbes in, you don't just walk away. It's not like a chemical fertilizer. It's not a silver bullet, but they will be there. And as long as they're fed, and as long as they're kept in contact with living roots, then they will stay around and they will continue to do their job. But they will need organic matter feeding in to keep them going year on year. And we've also got the option of providing a brewing system and help with, if groups of farmers want to create their own capacity for brewing, then we can help with that and produce some other culture for them. So I've said it's not a silver bullet. You still need to go in and do all the farming practices that are necessary, liming and various other things that are important depending on your soil conditions. But the great thing is that none of our products are messed about with. They're not made by people in white coats. It's Jeff and me, and we go and brew them, and they come from the soil and they go back into the soil. So it's very much working in partnership with nature.
If anyone has any questions or anything, let us know.
Yeah. Hi, Jeff.
Hi, Victoria.
I have read a little bit about biodynamic farming. How does your methodology sort of relate, or does it at all relate into that way of?
No, not really. Biodynamic, I think, is a lot more structured than we are, and they have lots of do's and don'ts. I know a number of biodynamic farmers who buy microbes from us, so they recognize the importance and use them, but they're more structured than we are, or that most farmers are. So, I think we rub along together, but we're not the same.
Okay, another question. In applying microbes to a old permanent pasture that hasn't been ploughed, I mean, a lot of what strikes me that a lot of, in terms of the diversity and the resistance to drought, is already there. It's about value added and what microbes that imported from you would do to make a difference on that platform.
Well, most of the microbes that are in the soil are dormant or dead, and that's what we found with going to the New Forest, was that the earthworms weren't there because they had nothing to go and eat and play around with. As soon as we put the microbes in with that vibrant population, with molasses to feed them and get them going, then the soil structure changed because the earthworms came and everything clicked into place. So I think we do add value even in a permanent pasture like that.
And of course, the first thing we do, with anything like that, is to test it, to go and have a look, and about what's actually going on in the soil. And if the soil was excellent soil, then we, and the worms were there, and the whole cycle of microbes were feeding it, and because that's our intention, is to get the soil back to as good a soil as it can possibly be under natural circumstances.
Yeah, and then so in a sense it's a kickstart rather than a repeat treatment.
Oh yeah, and we as we said, we can subsoil with it, we can foliar feed with it, we can soil condition with it, either spray it on or subsoil it. There's a number of different ways of getting it on there.
How does the foliar feeding work in relation to, in comparison with subsoiling it? Because one point you're putting it in the ground, another thing you're just spraying on the foliage.
And as we said right at the beginning, you know, in the cycle, it doesn't really matter where you put the microbes in, they'll go to work. So we would only suggest subsoiling if you had a compaction issue. And basically what I think we get compaction because there's a lack of biology in the soil. So what we say is we're just kickstarting, as you say, putting the biology back in the soil and then supporting it till, you know, it becomes healthy enough to be self-sustaining, because that would be the intention for anyone, to just get to a place where you wouldn't need necessarily to add anything. I mean, cover crops, the use of cover crops is always, you know, becoming more recognized. And yeah, so I think for a lot of people with permanent pastures, probably not a lot needs to be applied to make quite a difference.
The other benefit of foliar feed, Victoria, is that you're actually putting the microbes onto the surface of the leaves, and they'll then reduce the susceptibility to pathogens. So, you know, if you've got that lovely healthy microbe layer on the leaves, they will prevent diseases and pests getting onto it.
Yeah, what time of year do you tend to think that works best? I guess in the spring, summer months.
They don't want to be on in too warm weather, because they like to be moving around, and they could then just dry up and not be able to move. So early spring, I would say. But you need to have soil temperatures above 8 degrees centigrade, otherwise they just go dormant.
Okay, and that's in any application, any form of application. Yeah.
That's right, yeah. So one of the things is, I mean, if people want to get them on the ground early, then people in the area, in this field, still recommend using some nitrogen fertilizers just early on to get plants moving. So it's not a, you know, you will not use nitrogen fertilizers beyond going into this. It's still part of the armory that farmers have.
Jeff, just quickly on the subsoiling scenario. So we know that we've got a plough pan at about 6 to 7, 8 inches in places where we have a bit more soil. We've been organic 21 years now, and typically we've ploughed and combi drilled. So we've created this plough pan, and this year for the first time we actually went in with a subsoiler, low disturbance subsoiler after harvest. And the ground, like from an observation point of view, the ground is just transformed.
Yes.
And what I would love to do is actually put some microbes down the spout behind the leg.
Mm-hmm.
But why would you put it in at such a deep? You know, why would you put it in at such depth? You know, why wouldn't you be putting it in at sort of 3 to 4 inches where there is, you know, the fertility, where there is the life?
I think we believe that where the compaction is basically where there's the lack of biology, so that soil has collapsed at that point. So by subsoiling at the depth of the compaction, what we're doing is putting the microbes back in there. Hopefully they will then attract the worms and everything else. So we see it as putting the biology back in the place where it's lacking.
Okay.
They will end up going to where the roots are, and they'll end up in that 4 or 5 inches just below the surface.
Okay. And then the next question is, have you developed a system in place already that has do you have a subsoiler with a front tank on it?
Yes. Well, actually the subsoiler we built, we actually mounted the tanks on the subsoiler itself.
Okay.
But we are converting, our next subsoiler will have the tank on the front of the tractor.
Sure.
And so we would just set that at whatever depth we need to.
Yeah.
We dose at about 150 litres a hectare. So that's typically what we put in the ground, which is, you know, we think that's a sort of optimum amount for you know.
And what does that cost, Jeff?
It's about,
Well, I mean, we're working on the sort of the same sort of thing. We've done it in two directions, Sam. We're looking at the route coming back from nitrogen fertilizer, and then we're looking at how much it costs us. And funnily enough, the two come out about the same. It'll be about £400 per hectare, including application costs.
£400 a hectare.
Yeah, that's what we estimate in, you know, total cost of applying it as well.
Yeah.
but
So
if you had your own kit and things like that, naturally the price would come down quite a lot.
So so we're farming about 2,000 hectares. So all in one block of organic. You know, at £400 a hectare just wouldn't be, you know.
But that's not the material cost. The material cost is near about 50.
Okay.
But we're saying if you look at what you'd spend putting that on the ground and everything else.
So if we were to get a subsoiler and then put a tank on it, modify it.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's not rocket science.
It would come in at about £50 a hectare.
Yes.
Okay. And what exactly is the product?
It's microbes.
Yeah, but is it like a powder?
No, it's liquid. A liquid.
So it is a liquid.
Yeah.
So you create a liquid. It's not something that is dissolvable.
No, I mean, it is dissolvable because it can be dissolved in water to increase. If you wanted more water in the soil, you can dilute it more. But it's got molasses in it as a feedstock for the microbes. Yeah. And there are some minerals in there as well. We've got seawater concentrate, and we've got a seaweed extract to give micronutrients as well. So it's not a fertilizer. It's a conditioner.
How much can you produce?
Well, we've just produced double concentrate. We're doing double brews at the moment, so we're up to about 16,000 litres a month.
Okay. And is it organic approved?
Not yet. Not under Soil Association rules, but it is a natural product, so I don't think there'll be any major concerns.
Is that something you're looking to do?
Yes. I mean, it's something that when we started 12 years ago, it did have approval as an organic product, but since we moved off, that's kind of fallen between the cracks. As we come back, of course, we will get it back. So it's just a matter of time and
we're talking to the Soil Association approvals department at the moment.
Do you think that's something that might be sorted within 6 months?
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah. Okay. I think that answers all of my questions. No, so just within our rotation, we have half the land in herbal ley and then half the land in cereal, and it's something that I would like to try both on the herbal ley ground and also the arable land. Yeah. And so what I'm thinking is actually a grassland. So we tried the subsoiler that we had. We hired one over sort of August, September this year. It wasn't any good at going into grass.
Yeah.
But
I think I would rather have something that could go into grass and then also cereals. Or I'm thinking it would go into a stubble.
Yeah. The other area, Sam, I think where you've been doing the mob grazing.
Yeah.
And you've got all the straw on the ground, or the fodder.
Yeah.
Maybe interesting to try spraying on there as well, because I think that would accelerate the breakdown, like bokashi.
Yeah.
And I think that we'll certainly be developing our own, like the picture of the German one, where with the rotavator and spraying. And if someone wants to treat the stubble or wants to put their cover crop back in without disturbing too much, but the subsoiler is, like you say, minimum disturbance. And we've got one, but we're working on the next one, which is for grassland.
Yeah.
So to come up with very little disturbance on the surface.
Just given that you're seeing Andy Cato on Monday,
right?
Do you think a strip till system or a strip till machine could be developed. So then if you're working on about 500 mil spacings, you go into the herbal lay with your strip till and you put some microbes down the spout behind,
Right.
pre-drilling, as
Yeah.
opposed to going into a stubble post-harvest, because it would be nice to have it going into something that's then got living roots already in place.
Yep.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, people on the continent use it both ways.
Okay.
Yeah. And
That's very
also
interesting.
sometimes with the seed, they use the microbes as a seed dressing. You get
Yeah.
a higher level of germination.
So we've used quite a few organic approved seed dressings. We
Right.
used one a while ago called Stimplex, and we dressed some organic barley seed, spring barley seed, with this product Stimplex, and it was unbelievable the difference. So we did half the field with Stimplex and half not, and it did probably 1.5 tons, if not 2 tons more than.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that would interest me, in that possibly using it as a seed dressing as well.
Yeah,
Was that an amino acid dressing?
Yeah, I don't actually know what it was. I think it was a sort of seaweed compound.
All right. Okay. I will look into it. Stimplex.
Yeah.
I don't know if they do it anymore. Stimplex. I'm just looking at it now. Yeah, they do it. It's a sea plant premium liquid biostimulant.
Yeah. Basically seaweed. And that has a lot of minerals in it.
Yeah.
Wide range. That's why we also put the minerals in our mix. We put a seawater concentrate, which is seawater which has had the sodium chloride removed.
Yeah.
So basically you've got all the minerals in there, and we add that to all our products.
Okay, that's interesting. I'd really like to try some.
Good.
Definitely. Yeah.
We'll definitely come and see you in the new year.
Yeah, I thought your presentation was brilliant, so thank you.
Thanks, Sam.
Yes, he does the mechanics.
Wasn't as impressive as yours.
I do
but-
the good looks.
No, you're a very good double act.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, guys. You were very good.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
It was well put. Sometimes you get blinded by those presentations. Yours was just right, but
Yeah.
enough science, and it's good, sensible.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, great. Well, you know where we are. If you anything we can do for you, then
So Jeff, I'll pop up and see you at
that would
Hill.
be great. Yeah,
Yeah.
come and have a look anytime.